Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to today's The Hindu Newspaper Analysis, where we shall be looking at some of the important articles which have appeared in today's Hindu newspaper, that is for 27th of July 2023, for the Delhi edition, and we shall be analyzing certain important perspectives associated with those particular articles. Now, before we directly delve into the topics, a minor announcement for all of you. So, we are going to conduct a scholarship test. The National Scholarship Test will be conducted on 30th of July at 11 a.m. where you can get a chance to secure close to around 90% of scholarship, and the registration for that particular test, the description is something which is given below. Now, having said that, let us take a look at the topics that we are going to discuss today. So today in total, we are going to take a discussion for 6 different topics. So the first topic is the Lok Sabha passes Forest Conservation Amendment Bill, and that has appeared in page 1 of the Delhi edition. Now this is still a bill. So what we will try to do here is we'll try to actually unpack the various details included in this bill. And when it will finally be decided or passed as an act, then we will get a much greater clarity of the various different nuances involved. Having said that, we shall be taking a look at few of the areas which have not even been included in the article per se, but we shall be analyzing them from the various different joint committee reports and the various reports that have emerged in various platforms about that particular bill. So this is going to be relevant for your GS paper 3 and 2 as well. Okay, then shedding more light on the debt dilemma. Now this is about the fiscal situation that the country faces, the debt to GDP ratio that we have, and the conditionality of the various different states, what should be done as a kind of a solution. So that has appeared in the editorial section, that is page 6. This is relevant for your economics and again relevant for your GS paper 3. Then, the SCO or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is a success story that can get better. So this is relevant for your IR, that is GS paper 2. Then, certain aspects and certain news stories which have emerged, with the help of which we will be taking a look at some of the government schemes and some of the further other details which are relevant for your examination for prelims as well. So one of them which has appeared in the portion of the editorial section is resilient but just. So that is about the global economic outlook that we have. So this has appeared in page 6. Then West Bengal government announces a mangrove sale on the International Day of Mangrove Conservation, which was actually celebrated yesterday. So what is that mangrove sale? And thereby we shall be also taking a brief look at mangrove conservation. Then 530 districts reported as free from manual scavenging. So with this particular article, we shall be actually looking at a couple of government schemes and programs which aim to provide solution to the problem of manual scavenging, which claims many lives every year in our country. And even though the government has reported that basically for the last few months and last year there has not been a significant death reported due to manual scavenging, but it is more important for us to understand the government scheme and the program being run to provide the solution for the same. So without further ado, let us initiate the discussion for the first topic. So the first topic is Lok Sabha passes Forest Conservation Amendment Bill. Now this has appeared in the page 1 and is relevant for your GS paper 3 in chief. Now Forest Conservation Bill, the amendment bill. Now this has been brought about to bring amendments to the Forest Conservation Act of 1980 to amend Forest Conservation Act of 1980. So first of all, what is the purpose of this particular amendment? Why is it that this amendment has been brought into place? So there are multiple reasons which have been cited by the minister himself, and basically when you take a look at a broader analysis of those particular objectives or the missions behind this particular amendment to be passed, you have to understand that the first of them is to increase the forest cover and the tree cover of the country, and also ensure that forests and development, they go hand in hand. And also, this particular amendment seeks to empower the local community in many of the different areas to bring about their own plantation and cultivation in those areas which have not been regarded or designated as a forest land or not has been notified under that. And simultaneously, there have been certain exemptions which have been provided as per this amendment to allow for the security forces to bolster up their infrastructure and in general the infrastructure building that we observe. Because it has been realized that in many of the areas, particularly the forested regions, there has been an immense lack of infrastructural connectivity, and that significantly impacts the local community. Their economic development and realization of their economic potential is hampered because they are not able to go to the nearest place because of lack of infrastructure or lack of connectivity in chief, but also the basic provisions. That in itself is something of a rare commodity because construction is not to be allowed in these particular areas. Having said that, this particular bill is referred to as being very contentious because there are certain issues which have emerged and certain issues which don't particularly behove well for the forest land. Now, let us take a look at the key principles involved and the key pointers involved as per this amendment, and let us take a look at the various exemptions provided and what are the issues and the concerns that everyone is actually raising about this amendment. Now, this is going to be relevant for your mains exam significantly because in mains pattern you will find the questions which are being set, they generally refer to the aspect that analyze this particular amendment in detail. Right. So that has been the case in the earlier amendments regarding environmental conditions as well. So UPSC can always end up repeating that. So you should be able to understand both the pros and the cons of this particular amendment. But first of all, here, when we take a look at the key pointers, so here I have given you a kind of a descriptive analysis of the key pointers. So if you take a look at it, so here, the land which has been notified as a forest under the Indian Forest Act 1927 or in government records after the 1980 Act came into effect, all those lands, they come under the purview of this particular amendment. Okay, so please understand the original Indian Forest Act of 1947. So as per that act, whichever land has been notified as a forest and also after the 1980 Act. Now here, before proceeding ahead, what is it that we classify as a forest? Wherever you live, in whichever part of the country that you live or you reside in, you would have come across many areas of significant amount of tree density, significant amount of green cover, but that might not be regarded as a forest. So what is it that is required for a region to be designated as a forest? So it is something which is driven by what we refer to as canopy cover. So for example, let's suppose you have the presence of trees. Okay. Now, every tree has got its canopy. So this particular portion of the tree, that is what we refer to as canopy. Okay. Now, let us take a top view analysis of any of this area which is under, let's say, vegetation or significant amount of density of trees are present in that region. So if you take a top view of that particular region or a satellite view of that particular region, this particular area. So from the top view, I'm sure you won't be able to take a look at the trunks and the branches. Only the canopy will be something which will be visible. So from the top view, you are able to take a look at only the canopy. Okay, only the canopy, and that is referred to as canopy cover. That is referred to as the canopy cover of an area. Now, in any particular area with a minimum area size of 1 hectare, 1 hectare should be the minimum area where we are considering that to be considered as forest or not. So in any such forested area or in any such area where you have a lot of trees, where the size of the land is more than 1 hectare, if the canopy cover is greater than 10%, only then will that area be regarded as a forest. I will repeat this. So in any particular area, not less than 1 hectare, if the canopy cover is greater than 10%, that is regarded as a forest. Now there also you have a further classification of the types of forest. When we talk about the different types of forest, you have very dense forest, you have moderately dense forest, and then you have open forest. You have very dense forest, then you have moderately dense forests, and then you also have the open forests. Now what is the difference between all of them? How is it that we are able to distinguish that which is the open forest, which is the very dense forest, etc.? So all of it is determined based upon the canopy cover. That is the density of the trees. In any area, let's suppose if the canopy cover is very, very high, that means the tree density is also going to be very, very high, isn't it? So we can classify it as a very dense forest. So if the canopy cover in an area is greater than 70%, then it is regarded as a very dense forest. In any particular region, if the canopy cover is, let's say, for that region between 40% to 70%, that is regarded as moderately dense forest. And in any area, if the canopy cover lies between 10% to 40%, that is regarded as an open forest. So you can on your own imagine that when we are talking about a canopy cover of 10% to 40%, obviously the trees won't be present in that greater density. So open forest is something which has been increasing in our country for the past few decades now. So if you compare or have the analysis from 2001 to 2021, basically, you will find that yes, our tree cover has increased, our forest cover has increased. Overall, it has shown a net increase. But all that increase is attributable to the open forest. Now here, if I ask you a simple question, where do you think the biodiversity will be greater? Where do you think the environmental diversity and the environmental protection will be greater? Obviously, it is a no-brainer that it will be much greater in the case of very dense forest. But then, upon deeper analysis, based upon the forest survey reports which are generated every couple of years, we get an idea that the moderately dense and the very dense forests, they have declined ever so slightly, whereas it is the open forest and the increase in the open forest area which has given the country a kind of a boasting point that look, our green cover has been increasing. So the need of the hour is to do what? To encourage more of these very dense forests. And here you should also be aware that why is it that open forests are increasing in size or in area? That is because whenever you hear about any of the afforestation, reforestation programs, now in those cases, let's suppose in a land area, let's take a land area of 10 hectares where afforestation program is to be carried out. Obviously, the plantation drive which is carried out, not all the trees they survive because they are actually planted artificially, right? Many of the times the local breeds and the local varieties are not taken care of. So many of the plants, they are unable to survive, and significantly there is a significant amount of spacing which is also provided. And the natural biodiversity, in a way, in many of the cases due to intrusive or rather invasive alien species, the natural biodiversity is also inhibited. So that is why it is the open forest which is on the rise. Now this is a question which has been asked by UPSC earlier as well. Now coming back further to the pointers indicated by this amendment bill, so Act will not be applicable for land converted to non-forest use before December 12, 1996. Now, why is it that December 12, 1996 is picked up as that particular date? And what is the meaning of this particular sentence here? That the Act will not be applicable for land converted to non-forest use. That means, let's suppose after the Forest Act had been passed in 1980, right? Now, after that, let's suppose in 85 or in 1990, a particular region of the forested area had been diverted for mining purposes or for any other activities. Now, those areas won't come under the purview of this bill or the new regulations. So, why December 12, 1996? That is because it was the date of an important Supreme Court judgment, and that is the Godavarman case. T.N. Godavarman versus Union of India and others. That was the case where Supreme Court basically sought to clarify the aspect of what do we consider as a forest. And also it sought to bring about a kind of a blanket ban on deforestation activities across the country. Now, deforestation, when it is carried out, it is oftentimes carried out under the garb of that, okay, this land is not under forest land, so we can cut this tree. And there is a significant amount of political bureaucratic connivance in that as well, where many of the areas, they are diverted from forest land into non-forest land, and then there is a massive deforestation. This is something which has been observed on a large scale in the northeastern states of the country for the past couple of decades, where you have multiple different plywood companies which have made a good fortune on the basis of these practices. So that is why Supreme Court, it came down hard on the governments, both the central as well as the state governments, in the T.N. Godavarman case. So that is again something you should be aware of as a trivia that you can utilize for your mains answer writing. Godavarman versus Union of India. Okay, so this is why the new amendment bill talks about before that date of judgment. Now, it also allows the central government to specify terms and conditions for carrying out certain activities, such as when we talk about reconnaissance. Reconnaissance means exploration of an area, whether you have mineral resources in an area, the prospecting, investigation or exploration, and even seismic surveys. Where is it that seismic activities can be experienced or projected to have happened in the near future? So all those areas, the central government will specify the terms and conditions for carrying out, and in certain areas or in certain of these conditions, these activities can be carried out even without the approval of the central government. And you have to understand the meaning of this particular part or the impact of this particular part, that these activities can be carried out in certain cases without the approval of the central government as well. So what does that mean? First of all, what is the logic of including this particular point in the amendment bill? The logic is very simple, as put forward by the Environment Minister. The logic is that, look, in the name of the forest, what we are doing is we are not exploring significant amount of our mineral resources. And in a present day age, when you have the critical minerals such as lithium, etc., which are in such great demand due to electric vehicles and battery technology, we as a country, we cannot afford to look back or ignore many different mineral deposits just because they are under forest land. So that is the logic of economic development. But then what is the counter argument here? Why is it that this particular move has been criticized significantly? That is particularly because in the name of development, where does the buck stop? Or where is it that we take a comma or a pause from there? Because it might happen that you might divert a large area of land for, let's say, exploration and seismic activities, studies, etc. But you have to understand that while that is being carried out, there will be a significant amount of impact on already critical biodiversity habitats that the forests are experiencing. So that is why that comes at a huge cost. And there is also a greater scope for misutilization and exploitation of this particular norm or provision. And various different organizations, companies, corporates, etc., they can end up exploiting that. So there needs to be a very stringent regulatory framework. So in your answer, whenever you write an answer, you have to create a kind of a way forward. You cannot simply say that this provision is so bad it should have been omitted from the main amendment bill itself. So when you are writing a way forward in these conditions, always say that yes, it is prone to being exploited, but at the same time, that means you need a very stringent regulatory framework to monitor whether someone is abusing these provisions or not. Okay? Now, here, as per the provisions, the state government also is required a prior approval of the central government for any designation of a forest land to any kind of a private entity. So any state government, whenever they are, let's assume, they are trying to divert some amount of forest land as, first of all, designating them as non-forest land or transferring them for any other purposes, they need a prior approval of the central government. So this empowers the central government. The various provisions that you will see, all of these provisions, they have been empowering the central government. Now, it specifies certain activities that can be carried out in the forest, such as establishing checkposts, which makes sense, fencing and bridges for infrastructural connectivity, and also allows running zoos, safaris, and ecotourism facilities. Now, think about this particular point for a brief moment. The bill also allows running of zoos in the forests. Now, Supreme Court has already criticized this particular act once, few years back when this was brought to the notice of Supreme Court. Supreme Court actually noted and made an observation that in a forest land, why do you need a zoo? When you have a forest land and where you can maintain a natural habitat, why not ensure that you have the basic national park or wildlife sanctuary regulations going on, or the Project Tiger, Project Elephant regulations going on? Why do you need to construct a zoo in the middle of the forest? It makes absolutely no sense. Why to keep the animals in captivity where they have an open area available to themselves? So this is again a bit contentious. And again, the purpose is to bring about a greater environmental awareness. The purpose always behind establishing of zoos, safaris, ecotourism is to bring about a greater awareness amongst a larger population for environmental conservation. But at what cost? Can we destroy the existing forests just in the name of promoting awareness? Because understand, construction of zoo does not only mean construction of certain amount of cages to have the captive animals present there. Construction of zoos and that construction activity in itself will also bring about huge footfalls. Large amount of population will frequent those areas, and that vitiates the natural conditions of any particular forested landscape. So that is why this is another area which is contentious. Now, there have been significant amount of exemptions which have been provided. Exemptions in various different conditions. What are those exemptions? So forest land along a rail line or a kind of a highway, a public road maintained by the government providing access to habitation or to a rail and roadside amenities up till a maximum size of 0.1 hectare. Okay, so that is exempted from the regulations. There, the stringent regulations of the Forest Act won't be applicable anymore, right? So let's suppose, and you would also have come, if you have traveled by roadways or by railways, you would also have come across those highways passing through the forested area. Now, in those regions, there has been a provision that close to around the size of 0.1 hectares, you can have or develop certain amenities, let's say such as public washrooms, restaurants, fuel pumps, etc. And in the case of the rail lines, the need of the hour is to develop a kind of a proper fencing, but that is also resulting in fragmentation of the habitats. So while all the other countries are seeking to develop, and even in India we have done so in the case of the Delhi-Mumbai expressway which is under construction, about the underpasses and the overbridges, the green overbridges whereby the wildlife can crisscross so that the fragmentation of habitat does not happen. So if this particular entire region is exempted, yes, the public utilities will be benefited, but again, there is a chance of potential exploitation. Then, another one, which was significantly pointed out by the minister that land situated within 100 kilometer from the international borders, line of control or LOC or LAC, right, for construction of a strategic linear project of national importance and concerning national security. So, near the border, almost 100 kilometers near the border. Now, I'm sure all of you would be aware of the fact that India for the past few years has been on a kind of a construction spree where all the border facilities and the border infrastructure is being bolstered up at an incredible pace. And that includes the various different types of roads, tunnels, and various frontier highways which are being constructed all the way from the region of eastern Ladakh, all the way stretching into the region of Arunachal Pradesh. Now, many of the times these construction activities, they hit a roadblock. Why? Because the environmental clearances and the forest clearances, they are not provided, because the norms do not allow for the same. Now, these regions have been exempted, that there you can carry out these border checkpost construction activities and other frontier highway. Now, Arunachal Frontier Highway is one of those which was stuck in limbo for a long period of time. And that is a kind of a frontier highway which will significantly strengthen our defense capabilities by allowing the defense forces to come right up to the border of Arunachal Pradesh. And I hope we are aware that till now we did not have any such border highways in the region of Arunachal Pradesh. And that is a part of the larger geopolitical discussion and a larger strategic discussion that why India took that decision to not construct highways across the border across Arunachal Pradesh, because of the basic fear which emerged during the late 50s and during the China War, Indo-China War, that if we construct significant amount of infrastructure in those areas, maybe the Chinese could use that to come into our territory. So from that mindset, now India has emerged to be, over a period of few decades, India has emerged to be much more positive and much more, in a way, confident. So that is why these regions are being bolstered up with infrastructure, but then it is the Forest Act which has come in the way of these constructions. So this is cited for security purposes. Okay? And then land up to 10 hectares for constructing security related infrastructure, proposed to be used for constructing defense related projects. So overall, for bolstering the security, these regions have been provided a kind of an exemption. But then we have taken a look at the provisions, we have taken a look at the exemptions. So what are the issues finally that you have to keep in mind? One of those issues is when we talk about the exemptions, let's say in the border areas. Now there are certain issues associated with that. What are those issues? First of all, when we actually provide exemption to 100 kilometers of land parcel from the border area, imagine the situation in northeastern states. Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Manipur, Mizoram, in all these northeastern states, there is a significant amount of deforestation which has already been carried out. And there is a high amount of forest density present in those border areas. And already we have seen, and we have talked about it yesterday as well, that how deforestation in a way alters the water cycle, can bring about sporadic rainfall and initiates frequent landslides and disasters. So in these cases, when we talk about the northeastern states, that is where there will be a significant amount of an impact created. Then other exemptions, when we talk about, again in the border areas, the exemption has been provided to bolster the security. But if you analyze carefully, majority of the projects in the border areas, if they are not being completed, that is precisely because of the fact that there has not been enough movement on the side of the state government. Majority of the project proposals, they are stuck with the state government. And that is something which is going to prevail even now after these provisions. So those exemptions, they might not yield the desired result that is being sought by this amendment. And then after that, you also have the everlasting debate between environment versus development. So while various different areas have been provided with, or various different activities rather, reconnaissance, exploration activities, they have been given a kind of a free hand, but at what cost, as we have already discussed. And also, the provisions of this act also stands to contradict the Supreme Court judgment. So the chances are that this particular bill in itself will be challenged in the Supreme Court. So before this act finally comes into force and before we actually adopt this particular bill, you have to understand that it contradicts many of the areas as per the Godavarman case. So that is also an area of concern. Contradicts the SC judgment. Okay? So these are the areas of concern that one should be aware of. So overall, what is it that we have seen? We have taken a look at what is designated as a forest, right? What are the different types of forest? We have looked at the key pointers of the amendment bill. We have taken a look at where is it that the issues are arising from, what are the exemptions which are sought to be provided in this, and if that bill goes ahead with the act, this much information is more than sufficient even for your mains exam. Now, after this, coming to the next article or the next topic, and that is shedding more light on the debt dilemma. Now, this has appeared in the editorial section and this is relevant for your portion of economics, that is your GS paper 3, right? Now here, the debt. And here you will frequently, if you take a look at the article, you will frequently come across public debt. Now what do we mean by public debt? Overall. So when we talk about the overall debt that the country has, that includes the debt that the central government has and the debt that the state governments have. The problem is that the state governments, their debt level has been rising at an incredibly fast pace. And over a period of time, even RBI has been pointing this out, that many of the states, they are running various different schemes, they are running various different programs, but their debt level is increasingly going higher. Why? Because they are doing that on the verge of borrowing more money. Right? So they are basically pushing the amount of payment for tomorrow, for future, and borrowing much more. So during the time of the COVID pandemic, the overall national debt, and when we talk about debt here, we talk about the debt to GDP ratio. Debt to GDP ratio for any country is very important in order to understand what is the fiscal space available for that country. For example, if your debt levels are very high, that means if you have borrowed huge amount of money, you will be actually obliged to pay huge amount of interest as well. And whatever earning you are getting, you are paying large amount of interest. That means what? You don't have enough money to provide welfare schemes. You don't have enough money to build infrastructural activities. So during the time of COVID pandemic, the debt level, the national debt level actually went ahead and reached the figure of close to around 89.6%. Okay, and this includes the state plus the central debt level. Now, after the COVID pandemic, when overall there has been a fiscal consolidation on the side of the center and the states as well, there has been some amount of growth in terms of revenue as well. This has come down to around 85.7%, which is still significantly high. Just to give you a point of reference, now the 14th Finance Commission in its recommendation had actually suggested that the sustainable level of debt overall should be around 58.2%. Right? They had suggested that this should be the debt level, but we are at a figure of close to around 85.7. Now, having said that, if you compare the debt to GDP ratios of various other countries such as China, Japan, etc., in many of the cases, the debt is more than 100% of their GDP. So that is a different matter altogether. But for a developing country like India, where inflation is always a key point of concern and where always there has to be an increased lending provided for developmental activities, we cannot have a very unsustainable debt levels. So let us first of all understand what are the issues at hand. So primarily, we have a very high amount of public debt, and this is center plus states. Okay, now, then another issue at hand, as is pointed out in the article, is that in this year and next year, you have various different elections which are coming up. State elections, central elections, all the various different elections are coming up. Now, why is that a point of concern when it comes to national debt? Because whenever, and it has been the experience for the past few decades now, that whenever the electoral time or the election season comes in, the governments, they generally have a habit of promising a lot and creating a kind of a budget whereby they spend a lot so that they are voted back to power, be it the states, be it at the central level. So this brings about a kind of an irresponsible fiscal activity on the side of the states as well as at the central level in many of the cases. Fortunately, in the case of the last general election, we did not allow that to happen in the budgetary announcement of the last general election that was held in 2019. Such kind of responsibility was maintained. And the hope is that even in the next couple of years, at the side of both the state and the center, this has to be maintained. Now, the interest payment that we carry out for the debts that we have, for the borrowings that we have, that is huge. That is close to around 5% of our GDP. That is actually allocated to interest payment. And understand that 5% of GDP is such a high figure that our collective spending on education and health is less than this particular figure. So just get an idea about this. This is larger than the collective spending on education and health. Okay? And when you have such a scenario where your revenue deficit is also very high, what is revenue deficit? That is revenue expenditure and the overall revenue receipt that you have. So basically a balance of that. So whatever you are earning and whatever you are spending, that is the revenue deficit. There you don't create any kind of long-term assets. That revenue expenditure is mostly in the form of payment of wages, the welfare schemes that you have, the various different pension payments that go out. So that is your revenue expenditure. If the revenue expenditure is low for any particular government, that government has got larger scope to invest in long-term capital assets, to invest in roads, highways, connectivity by internet, electricity, drinking water supply, basic requirements can be done. So crowding out of welfare schemes is something which is already visible. Now, in the present day scenario, when we talk about the banking system, even though you have to appreciate, and basically there was a very nice article which was also written by T.N. Neenan a few days ago in last week, where if you take a look at the global situation of the banks, where banks in United States, banks in Switzerland, they basically went belly up recently. Indian banks have been doing comparatively better, because they have cleaned up their books continuously for the past 5 to 6 years, and now they are in a position to lend out more. But still, in the case of Indian banking system, and I'm sure you would have studied that in economics as well, we have a kind of a cash reserve ratio requirement of close to around 4.5%. CRR requirement, cash reserve ratio, is around 4.5% of our total time and demand deposit of the bank. And then also the statutory liquidity ratio, SLR, is close to around 18%, right? In order to ensure that the banks have some amount of liquidity so that bank run doesn't happen, so that in the worst scenario, banks still have significant amount of capital with them. So CRR and SLR together, they already are in the surplus of around 22%. Now, to add on to that, the banks, the scheduled commercial banks, they have to lend out around 40% for priority sector lending. What is priority sector lending? So when we talk about lending carried out for agricultural purposes, for housing, for education, etc., that is your PSL or priority sector lending. So 40% has to be lent for priority sector, and already 22% of your total amount of deposits are basically capped under CRR and SLR. So the ability of the banks to lend, that has reduced, and as that has reduced, the amount of borrowing for the fresh lenders for particularly, let's say, the manufacturing sector, that has also shrunk quite significantly. And that means manufacturing sector and the fresh lending, they have taken a massive hit, where the cost has gone up. Now, the performance of the states are not helping either. Be it the case of Punjab, West Bengal, Kerala or Rajasthan, as have been pointed out. In all these regions and in all these states, the debt to the GSDP or the gross state domestic product, so that debt to GSDP ratio is already unsustainably high. You can see that in the case of Punjab, it is close to around 50%. In the case of West Bengal, again close to around 40%. So automatically these states, they don't have the ability to spend in welfare schemes, or they don't have the ability to spend in long-term capital assets building in their states. So how do they spend? And how is it that they carry out various welfare schemes? By fresh borrowing. They borrow more, and that further adds on to the problem. So then, what is it that one should do, or what is the path ahead? First is disinvestment. Now, the famous adage and the famous saying goes that the government has got no business to stay in business, right? What is the meaning of that? That running of businesses is not the work of government. We have already seen the case of Air India. We have seen the case of BSNL. Now, while Air India has been basically eventually privatized and there had been a massive disinvestment, you have to understand that in all these various different companies that the government actually owned, they incurred massive amount of losses. At one point of time, Air India did require a cash injection of thousands of crores per annum. And same is the case with BSNL now. BSNL is also not turning profitable in any near time future. And given the increased amount of competition and efficiency sought by other players, BSNL is in a tough spot. So rather than dragging these areas, and rather than actually pouring out huge amount of sums of money for bailing out these sectors continuously, they should be given into professional hands, the hands of those people who know how to run a business, right? So that is where disinvestment targets that have been set by the government for various different budgets, right? If you take a look at the central government, the disinvestment targets that have been set, rarely have they been met. Even prior to the COVID days and the COVID pandemic, the disinvestment target was never met, because also there is a significant amount of public sentiment against disinvestment, that it should not be carried out. But also the market scenarios in many of the cases doesn't pan out as it is, and also there's a kind of a hesitancy that if we do this, if we actually disinvest, let's say BSNL, or if we go ahead with the privatization of BSNL, whether that will be taken in a positive light or not. But that should be done to ensure fiscal prudence. Then ensuring compliance of GST. Now, when GST was implemented, there have been a lot of issues. And it is an undeniable fact that significant amount of people and significant amount of merchants, they faced issues because of GST. But if you have been noticing the GST figures for the last year or so, you would have noticed that it is on a continuous uptick. The GST realization on a monthly basis has consistently been delivering a greater amount of revenue. So that means the system has smoothened out. The system has started working now. So there is a need for greater compliance. Even yesterday, and in yesterday's newspaper as well, it was reported, and as the minister replied in Rajya Sabha or in the parliament, where the minister said that close to around 11,000 crores of a kind of misdoing or wrongdoing of GST has been detected. So if there is a greater compliance, there will be a greater realization of revenue. Then comes judicious redistribution. Redistribution here means what? It means the aspect of direct cash transfer as well as subsidies. Okay. Now these should be carried out with significant amount of intelligence, smartness, and also foresightedness. One should not carry out these particular measures that, okay, I will provide subsidy for a particular good significantly and let the people benefit, because understand this basic property. Let's suppose in a larger population, these many sections of people, they are economically deprived. But if you provide a huge amount of subsidy for a product, let's say petroleum, right? That is one of the most controversial and contentious products right now. So let's suppose you provide significant amount of subsidy on petroleum. Now that subsidy will be utilized by every part of the population, isn't it? So the fiscal burden on the state will increase, whereas who should benefit from it ideally? The deprived, the poorer section. They should get maximum amount of benefit. So it makes more sense to provide direct cash transfers to them rather than providing subsidy on the uniform or all the goods which are present. So that is where judiciousness comes into the picture. Then there has to be a check on populist schemes, and there is no two way about it. Various different finance commission reports, etc., they have cited that how when we talk about the pension payouts that the governments do make, that is very humongous, and the revenue expenditure has been increasing unsustainably. That is when more than a decade back, the old pension scheme was actually phased out. But for the last year or so, you would have observed that various different state governments, they have been bringing back the old pension scheme, which will always increase the revenue burden on the states. Now, what the states very smartly they are doing is, they are not immediately putting that expenditure in this year's or the next year's budget. They are postponing it 5 years down the line or 4 years down the line, that whichever government will be in power at that point of time, they will take care of the fiscal prudence. We don't have to take care of that. And then you need to have states following a strict fiscal discipline, which is not at all followed. The states, they have had a habit in our country for the past few decades where they end up spending as much as they can, and then they always have an eye to borrow more. But one has to understand that when the states will borrow more, even the center's ability to borrow or lend will keep on decreasing. So that is why if a particular state's financial health is not good, like the case in Punjab, they have to follow fiscal jurisprudence. Okay, so if these activities are taken care of, overall debt level can be controlled. Okay, now then coming on to the last major topic, or the third topic, that is the SCO is a success story that can get better. Now before talking about this particular topic, this is something which has again appeared in the editorial section, that is in page 6 of the Delhi edition. And before going into the details of it, one has to understand that who has actually crafted this article, because then you get an idea about what is the mood or what is the perspective provided by this article. So this is something which has been written by the charge of affairs when it comes to the Chinese embassy in India. So obviously SCO, being China's brainchild, is something that has been praised here, and justifiably so, but at the same time various different initiatives by China have also been praised. So overall, not going into the political aspect which this article significantly highlights, and by this article basically the individual is trying to highlight the warnings for a country like India, that how India should basically not be cozying up to the global geopolitics and not get entangled in the powers or the great game played by the great powers, and India should continue to remain neutral. Obviously for the past few days and for the past month or so, there has been an increased amount of unease in China with regards to India having strengthening relations with the European nations as well as North American nations. So that is where there has been a point of concern. Now, not going into the political aspect, what is relevant for the exam? So, challenges for the global order as has been highlighted. What is the challenge that the globe faces as of now? First of all, the geopolitical tensions are on the rise. You would have also come across the news story that recently Henry Kissinger, one of the doyens of diplomacy in the entirety of the world. Henry Kissinger was actually the Secretary of State in United States much earlier, almost 4 to 5 decades back. And he is regarded as one of the pioneers who improved the relationship between United States and China through the 70s and the 80s. Now, Henry Kissinger is almost 100 years now. But still, the Biden administration actually sent Henry Kissinger into China to have some amount of talks because the geopolitical tensions are rising, right? Russia-Ukraine war has actually polarized the world unlike ever before in the recent past. So much so that the Chinese defense minister had been sanctioned by many of the areas in United States. Why? Because China was supplying weapons to Russia for the Russia-Ukraine war. So that is where, in the case of the geopolitical tensions, there is always the global economy which takes a hit. The investments, right? The various manufacturing sectors, global supply chains, all of them, they take a significant hit. Then there are economic uncertainties initiated by the energy crisis across the world. You also have rising interest rates as a common phenomena, energy crisis, which is still felt by many parts of Europe. Why? Because of, again, the Russia-Ukraine war. That has brought about something which was unforeseen earlier. That is an incredibly high rate of inflation. And then you had the food shortage as well. So Russia pulling out of the grain treaty as well as India putting a ban on rice exports, that is going to hit the food availability and the grain availability in various parts of the world. Then there has been a power politics which is going on. China overall, you will see that it is trying to triangulate or it is trying to isolate India for a long period of time now, where they have been initiating a kind of a string of pearls strategy to surround India from all sides, building increased amount of relations and infrastructure building, and a kind of an economic bargain and economic blackmailing has been carried out by China. But Chinese allegation is that so is being done by the West as well. And here, something that China has not taken positively is the formation of Quad. Quad, which is a grouping of India, Japan, Australia and United States. Now that Quad is a kind of a sticking thorn in China's eyes because China sees it or actually visualizes it as an attempt to isolate China. So that is where the power politics comes in and economic coercion on the side of various large powers comes in. And then there has been a technological decoupling. Now this has been pointed out because recently you would also have come across a news story that India has basically put an end to the plans of a large Chinese electric vehicle manufacturer to set up its plant worth $1 billion in India. Similarly, India had put a ban on the participation of Chinese companies for 5G tech. And same thing has been done by Australia as well. Same thing is being followed by many of the European nations as well. And that is where China feels a kind of a technological isolation. It wants its companies to spread its wings across the globe, which is not happening. And there has been an ideological contest, whether you are with us. If you are with us, we will provide investment in your area, what is referred to as friendshoring. If you are not with us, then go take care of yourself. So that ideological contest is actually leading to greater damages to the underdeveloped and developing nations. The developed nations, they are playing their own power play. Then protectionism is on the rise, and this is on the rise for, let's say, past 10 years or more, where all the various countries, they are turning inwards. They are not looking to import and export more. They are trying to cut down all the imports. So that protectionism that only my country's companies will produce, that is bringing down the global trade. And as the global trade is coming down, a country like India or a country like China, rather, China is a better example, which grew significantly based on exports itself. The surplus that China had for a long period of time, for decades altogether, that was driven by huge exports. In our case, the economic demand from the internal part of the country in itself is sustainable. But in the case of China, this protectionism is hurting China. And China is on the verge of going through a phase of recession. So that again has been pointed out. Now, where is it that multilateralism comes in? Multilateralism is what? And the literal meaning of this particular term is when you have multiple parties involved in a kind of a dialogue, in a kind of an exchange, in a kind of deliberation, ideas exchange, knowledge exchange, and also peace-seeking initiatives, climate actions, all of that, that is where multiple partners have a say. That is multilateralism. India has been a long-term advocate of multilateralism because multilateralism is a key to provide long-lasting peace. Why is it that various different countries have a kind of a grievance against the superpower or against the major powers? Because they feel that their voice is not being heard at all. Whatever they are saying is completely being ignored. So obviously you will hold some amount of grudge, some amount of grievance. And that is the case with majority of the developing nations, majority of the underdeveloped nations as well. For example, the voice of entirety of Africa is not even represented at the Security Council. So the solution to the geopolitical tension is increased multilateralism. And when you have increased multilateralism, it will promote global peace. It will provide increased platform for dialogues and partnerships which are lacking. These geopolitical tensions, why are they increasing? Because the dialogues are not happening, isn't it? Climate action, where we need multilateral action, where there is no other way around it. For those climate actions as well, multilateralism proves to be the key. Then economic and technological help. Yesterday also we talked about the industry-led alliance when it comes to the circular economy in terms of reduce, reuse and recycle. So that is where technological sharing, knowledge sharing, even in the case of modern technology. Now here, this is where the irony and the hypocrisy lies. If you ask China to give them their technology when it comes to, let's say, a kind of a critical mineral development or development of electrical vehicles, they will not do so. But they will advocate that the other countries share their technology freely. So that is a different matter altogether, that if you have the technology, you don't want to share it. If you don't have it, you want everyone else to share it. So that is what the globe is going through. And then it is a counter to the politics of isolation being played by the major powers. So because of all of this, multilateralism is the way forward, needs to be promoted, and SCO as a member or as a multilateral grouping. Now SCO recently provided membership to Iran, isn't it? Now think about it. There have been various different efforts played by European nations and also various different US presidents to isolate Iran and thereby paint them as the biggest villains of the international community. Now, where will that lead to? Iran will also develop weapons to protect itself. Now, when Iran will develop weapons, I'm just giving you an example. If Iran will develop weapons, the other countries will counter that as well. So it will always escalate. So that is why countries like Iran becoming partners of SCO, that provides for a platform for initiating these kinds of dialogues, for promotion of peace and for clearing of any kind of misconception and miscommunication. Okay, so that is something that you should be aware of when it comes to SCO and multilateralism on a large. Now here, China has also provided certain initiatives. For example, when Quad meetings happened, now Xi Jinping, he announced a global security initiative. Now that global security initiative did not talk about what will be the framework. So that is China-led, relevant for your prelims now. Global Security Initiative. Okay, so this is China-led. where China has not defined the contours of what this initiative is going to be, who is going to be a part of this initiative, but this is seen as a counter reaction to Quad. And that is where what China seeks to do, or what actually Xi Jinping conveyed through this particular platform, is that if you are forming a security alliance, it should not be targeting me. And if I am forming a security alliance, it will not target you. So that is where he sought to have a kind of an understanding. Then China has also launched Global Development Initiative. Global Development Initiative. And this has been launched in order to basically provide a kind of a pathway, a framework for achievement of SDGs, as well as the area or the time beyond 2030. 2030 is the targeted time for achievement of SDGs, so the time beyond that. So that is what is being targeted by China, and China is seeking to bring various countries together on these particular platforms. So this is relevant for your prelims. Both of these are China-led. Okay? Now coming to the topics relevant for your prelims overall. Now, here, this is a part which has appeared in the editorial, that is resilient but just. So this is here IMF's latest update, International Monetary Funds. So IMF's update to global economic outlook. Now for your prelims, even this portion is relevant, because UPSC does ask this, that the global economic outlook is released by whom, right? World Bank, IMF, etc. These kinds of option-like statements are given. But then, understanding what this particular article talks about, so global economic outlook, which has been updated by IMF, that provides for a kind of a growth trajectory or growth projection for the year 2023, where it has been upgraded to almost around 3%, which is a good news. And IMF simultaneously has pointed out that the various headwinds, they are still prevalent across the global economy. Now, when we talk about the global economy in general, United States, Switzerland, now a few months back, there was an increased global panic whereby everybody thought that the banking system will again go bust because of the banks basically turning bankrupt in Switzerland, in the region of United States as well. But then that problem has been contained. At least it seems so. But simultaneously, United States, China, these have not been developing anymore, or the growth rate has been reducing, has plateaued, and they are on the verge of entering into a recessionary phase. So that is a major risk for the global development. The geopolitical tensions are also quite significant, which is not helping either. So these are your headwinds. Okay? Headwinds to global economy. Now, what has also happened in many of the other countries, which was also prescribed to India during the time of COVID pandemic, if you have read the various articles during the time of COVID pandemic, almost every economist would recommend to the Indian government that do one thing, distribute more amount of cash into people's hands so that there is a demand in the economy. Now, India did not do so, thankfully, but many other countries, including European nations and many of the North American regions, also did that. Now, what happened as a result of that was there was a significant amount of inflation. And along with that, now all that surplus money has now been spent. So again, the problem has come back to square one, where the inflation is also very high. People don't have money as well, right? So that brings about twin problems in these countries. And that is where the global growth is suffering, be it in South American nations, be it in European nations. Now, in the case of European nations, there is another problem. The inflation already, because of this monetary policy that I have told you, there is another factor to increment or to increase the rate of inflation. And that is the energy crisis. Energy crisis due to the Russia-Ukraine war, the supply of gas, the supply of crude oil, etc. that has been brought to a standstill. So that is why Europe has been experiencing increased inflation, where the growth rate has reduced. As a result of that, the global trade is going to suffer. It is in these scenarios where countries like India, they hold a kind of a shining light in the global din of the circumstances which prevail. So that is something that you should be aware for prelims purposes. Then West Bengal government announces the formation of a mangrove cell for the conservation of mangroves. Now this was done on 26th of July. 26th of July is important because it is the International Day for conservation of mangroves. Okay? You have various different UN organizations and bodies such as UNESCO which also celebrate this. But here in the garb of this, you have to attack a larger aim, and that is, first of all, mangrove conservation. Why it is relevant, we have to understand that climate conservation and climate change is going to be protected. Then also the coastal areas are going to be protected. There will be a greater carbon sequestration and absorption of carbon dioxide which will be done, and also important for biodiversity. Now another thing that you should be aware of when you are talking about mangroves is the central government scheme which has been initiated for the conservation of mangrove. And which is that scheme? It is very good, Mishti scheme. Mishti scheme, and that is mangrove or the Mangrove Initiative for Shoreline Habitat and Tangible Income for conservation of mangroves and bringing newer areas under mangrove cover. Okay, to bring newer areas under mangrove. Then, so that is something which is relevant for your prelims. Now after this, we move on to the last article, and that is that 530 districts reported as free from manual scavenging, whereby the center has already also said that there has not been a reported death due to manual scavenging. Manual scavenging is when, with the help of their own bare hands, people clear out the mucks and the sewage which is actually present. So there has not been a significant death carried out or caused due to manual scavenging, but then at the same time there have been deaths created or done or observed in the case of the sewers and cleaning of sewers because of lack of proper equipment, PPE kits, etc. Now here, what you can extract from this for the point of your prelims is couple of things. First is the Swachhata mobile app. What is the purpose of Swachhata app? Swachhata app which has been developed, that is to bring to light or bring into the attention of the urban local bodies, the municipalities, about the areas where sanitation or sewage is not taken care of, where cleanliness is not taken care of. So on this app you report this to the municipal body, to the municipal organization, and the urban local body then takes care of it. So that is something you should be aware of. And then in order to get rid of the curse, or rather the scourge of manual scavenging, the government has also launched the Namaste scheme. And what is the Namaste scheme? National Action for Mechanized Sanitation Ecosystem, whereby the sanitation workers, they will be provided or they are provided with a certain kind of a help and government support. So these are your basic aspects of the Namaste scheme. Namaste scheme is also important for your prelims and also for your mains, by the way. So in this Namaste scheme, and as per this, proper identification of all the people involved in this activity will be done. Occupational training and distribution of PPE kits for their safety standard, assistance for safety devices, a kind of a mechanized devices as well, extending health insurance to the workers and their family members under Ayushman Bharat scheme. Livelihood assistance will be provided to them in the long term as well, whereby skilling will also be provided, and a massive awareness campaign is also launched in order to improve their conditions. So these are basically done to improve the condition of manual scavengers, or rather basically the people who are involved in cleaning our own cities. Okay, so that will be all for today's discussion. Now we take a look at the couple of questions. So here, if you analyze the questions, so the first question, which is relevant for your GS paper 2, what is SCO? Discuss the role played by multilateral organizations like SCO in promoting global cooperation. So here, it is of 10 marker. So introduction, 20 to 25 words, right? So in the introduction, you just talk about Shanghai Cooperation Organization, when it is formed, what are the member nations, that's it. Then in the body part, you can further elaborate with the SEO. Why? Because the second portion of the question also talks about multilateral organizations like SCO. So in the second portion, you can elaborate about how membership of to Iran has been granted, and there has been initiation of the dialogue for new memberships to take place. So it will be a kind of an increased or a growing partnership. And what are the various roles played? So all the important role played by multilateralism that we discussed, highlight that with examples. More than sufficient. Conclusion has to be written in the positive aspect that in the present circumstance of increased global fracturing and increased global tensions, multilateralism is the way ahead for bringing about the maximum benefit to the maximum section of the population across the world. Okay. Now the second question, which is of 15 marks, discuss the impact that the Forest Conservation Amendment Bill will have on the environment once applied. So this is relevant for your GS paper 3, and such kind of question has been asked earlier multiple times. So keep an eye out for these kinds of questions. So here you have to talk about, we have to talk about the impact. So first of all, in the introduction, you talk about that this amendment has been brought about to amend which act? The Forest Act of 1980. And why? To bring about a kind of a greater economic participation, as well as provide a kind of a benefit for the security services. So while you are introducing the act, please don't introduce it that this act has been brought about, but the intentions are not good. Never do that kind of an introduction. Always, even if let's say you are not agreeing with the principles of the act, write it in the portion of the challenges faced or the issues or the concerns faced. It should always be written in a positive manner. Then after that, analyze the pros, the cons, exemptions which are provided, and eventually in the conclusion talk about that how these concerns and issues need to be taken care of, and a greater amount of public participation and a greater amount of public confidence is required for the success of this particular amendment. With that, you can conclude the answer and fetch a very good marks. So that will be all from my side here today. I hope the session was helpful and meaningful to all of you. So if you like the session, please don't forget to click on the like, share and the subscribe button. Until we meet again tomorrow, take care of yourself. Goodbye. Thank you.